Welcome to the 97 Republic YouTube channel, where I react to UFC news and live events. So I kindly ask that you hit the like button and the subscribe button, as that will really help this channel grow. And to ensure that you don't skip a beat, feel free to click the notification bell. That way you can guarantee that you don't miss any of the action. I really hope you enjoy this. Is what I'm about to tell you the biggest mistake that the UFC has and is continuously making. Now, this video doesn't pertain to a particular fighter. It doesn't pertain to either Conor McGregor or Francis Ngannou. Personally, I feel like had Conor stayed within the UFC, never fought Floyd, had 5 more years within the UFC, I don't think exponentially we would have seen much of a difference, due to the fact that everything Conor was able to accomplish, the eyes that he brought to the sport. I thought that it somewhat didn't reach its apex, but it was somewhat close to it. Seeing that, obviously, due to Conor, the sport is where it is today, and there's no arguing that. And it's not about Francis Ngannou either, because yeah, we didn't see the Francis and John Jones fight. We never will. But I mean, it's the name of the game. There's a lot of fights that we will never see. We never saw Habib versus Tony. We never saw Tony versus McGregor. We never saw John Jones versus Anthony Johnson. Rest in peace, Rumble. That guy was a stud. Yeah, he was awesome. But rather, what the UFC is currently doing, and where there's room for improvement to be more efficient, maybe get the sport to a higher level. Now, obviously, I'm a nobody. Dana White goes without saying, probably one of the best businessmen inside of combat sport history, where he's been running the UFC for decades now. And I mean, the fact that he built it from the ground up to where it is today, the same thing that he is accomplishing with Power Slap, I mean, the man is insane. But just a few things that I see circulate around the social media mixed martial arts community, where fans have a few problems. And basically, I came across this Instagram page. I can't remember the page's name, otherwise I would have definitely referenced it. And they asked the question, if you are Dana White for a day, what changes would you make to the UFC? Or what problems would you address? And obviously I saw a lot of things that I agreed with, especially with regards to the eye pokes, with regards to gloves, having the gloves, Trevor Whitman's gloves, that basically prevents you from giving an eye poke. Also with regards to point deductions whenever you hit the cup, or whenever you do accidentally have an eye poke, the onus should be on you to not have your fingers up. Also saw one where they said that if you're a champion, you're obligated to defend your belt within 6 months. If you don't do that, then you should vacate the belt. And I somewhat agreed with it, due to the fact that we have champions that are very inactive. I think what they should do is probably schedule every champion every 4 months or 5 months, and then we'll see what happens. But the problem is, when you have an injury, especially a severe one, or when you have illness, let's say you prepare for a fight in 4 months, you're the champion, and then you fall ill, or you get injured, it's gonna take you time to recover. So you've been practicing for 4 months, preparing for a fight for 4 months, and then all of a sudden this happens to you. Probably gonna take you a month to recover, depending on obviously on the severity of the illness or injury, and then take you 3 months. So it takes a while, and I don't think people should vacate their belt just because of it. But I do feel like in terms of activity, especially with regards to champions, we should see more activity. And so I agreed with that. But the two biggest ones for me is, personally, I feel like number one, which is the biggest one, is weight classes. Now, Joe Rogan goes on about this a lot of times, especially when he has an ex-fighter or an active fighter on the Joe Rogan Experience. They will talk about issues within the UFC, and I do think that this is a big one. What I think they should do is have a weight division every 10 pounds. So basically start at 125, then go all the way to 155, move welterweight either to 175 or 165, then have one at either 175 or 65. We have middleweight at 185, and then this is where it gets tricky, and we would love to hear your opinion on it. But would you rather have 185, 195, and then 205, or basically have 185 and then basically just jump to 205? Seeing that usually when guys fit that bracket, it's a more natural weight, if that makes sense. So yeah, and then have 205 to 260, and then have an open, almost like, I don't want to use bodybuilding, but with regards to the Mr. Olympia, they have an open category, which is obviously the category, but it doesn't limit you on how big, how heavy you can be. And we've had fighters within the UFC, or rather potentially within the UFC, that couldn't make 265. I mean, there are some big specimens in this world, and Bigfoot Silva, for example, couldn't make 265, so couldn't compete at heavyweight, because he's not called Bigfoot Silva because he's a small lad. So have it 265 heavyweight, and then have an open one which is 265 plus, and then we just see monsters taking on one another. Because the weight cutting is a massive issue, not only due to the fact that it's obviously unhealthy for the fighters, and you could argue, well, it's their body, their choice, all of this weird stuff, but it's not a fair representation of who is actually the best within a certain weight, due to the fact that I don't think a lot of fans understand how much weight some of these guys cut in order to confine to a certain division. There was a time where Paulo Costa weighed 225, 228 pounds. So he had to cut about 44 pounds, 43, 44, 42-ish to make middleweight. That is basically your leg. That is cutting off your leg to make weight. And guys like Dustin, guys like Habib, guys that are massive for lightweight, cuts about 30, somewhere in the 30 pounds to make 155. And we've only seen a handful of fighters that actually fight at their weight. And the most recognizable one out of all of those, the most common one, was Frankie Edgar, where Frankie fought at 155, and he was actually walking around at round about that weight. And I mean, he was the lightweight champion, had some insane fights, especially against Gray Maynard. And only later in Frankie's life, as he got older, as the guys got bigger, he fought at featherweight and dropped down to 145 for his fights. So we haven't really seen guys fight at their actual weight. And what the UFC should do to ensure that they implement this is, like USADA did, or WADA does with a random drug check or drug test. They should have a weight test. Just randomly pop by a fighter's house, tell him to get on the scale, see how much he weighs, and then the limit you can cut is 10 pounds. Have them cut maximum 10 pounds, and then they confine to that weight group. Then I feel like it'll be a much more fair reflection of who is actually the best at which weight, because now you have guys like Islam, guys like Habib, yeah, even Dustin, which, I'm not taking anything away from them, insane fighters. I mean, they're not 155ers, they basically make weight, and as soon as they get into the octagon on fight night, they weigh about 175, 180 pounds, because they basically just rehydrate and gain all of that water that they lost. So I think that's a major issue, and I think it would be insane. Have more divisions, make it fair, because now, if your argument is that everybody has the right to cut weight, sure, but some people, it's just more natural for them to be able to go through it. Either their metabolism works better, or they just shed water weight easier. It's not necessarily fair. So I feel like that is the biggest issue, and I don't think more divisions would be a problem. I think I think we'd enjoy it. We have more champions. That means you have more stars. That means that you are more marketable. Means that, you know, not a lot of pressure would be put on state champion of one division due to the fact that he has media days or all of these things. It's basically a workload that would be shared a lot better if we had more divisions, more champions. And that's just basically my opinion on weight classes within the UFC. And let me know if you agree. In the comment section, do you think we should have a weight class every 10 pounds, 125 all the way through to either 185, 195, 205? Let me know, because I'm not sure whether I'm alone in this. Obviously Joe Rogan is, but don't really see this topic a lot within the mixed martial arts community. And then the other problem, now this isn't as big, this is more of a smaller problem, and it's not necessarily a problem, it's just something that I feel could be better for the UFC, is the performance bonuses are weird. You know, the whole structure of the performance bonus, where usually on a card they'd have 4 performance bonuses, where 3 of them would account to the performance of the night, and 1 of them would be fight of the night, usually. And then sometimes you'd get a lot of stoppages, and then you'd have like 4 performances of the night. And the problem with this is, rather than having that, I'd say what makes sense would be to have 1 performance of the night, have 1 fight of the night, but then basically split the money of the rest in whatever portion fits the UFC best, and give it to fighters that win their fights via stoppage, because that incentivizes fighters to be more aggressive, to look for a finish. Now you could make the argument, well, we had UFC, I think it was UFC 300, where Dana White increased the performance bonus to like 300k, and it was insane. But we had some shockers. We saw people not push the pace at all, not be aggressive at all, play it safe, and then Dana obviously came out and said, never again will that happen. I get that, but the problem is, when you have big bonuses and it's not somewhat universal, you could run the risk of being aggressive, of wanting to get a finish, and then end up not getting a bonus. So the risk reward isn't really, it doesn't really make sense. It's not viable for you to be able to risk something which seems much higher, because you could lose a fight, you could press on something, you could, you know, make a mistake forcing an issue, and then not have the performance of the night, or not have a bonus. And to give you an example, this past weekend we had Marlon Vettori versus Roman Dolidze, and we had that fight night, and we saw a lot of stoppages. And I don't know whether the UFC actually compensates, you know, a lot of these fighters that ended up getting stoppages but didn't get the bonus. I don't know whether the UFC compensates them behind the scenes. If they do, then this whole conversation is meaningless. But if they don't, to give you an example, there are guys that missed out on a performance of the night bonus. I'm saying guys as a general term, I don't necessarily mean men, that missed out on a bonus but had insane performances. We saw Waldo Cortez Acosta knocking out Ryan Spann in an impressive fashion, basically dominating the fight. Didn't feel like he was in any trouble at any point of the fight. Knocked out Ryan Spann, albeit second round. He didn't get a bonus. Felt like he could. Felt like it was a really impressive performance. We saw Kevin Vallejos on the main card making his UFC debut, knocking out Song Woo Choi, a guy who has had a victory win, or a victory, over Yusuf Zalal. The same Yusuf Zalal that recently beat Count Gators. Song Woo Choi has fought, he fought Movsar Evloev in his UFC debut. So he has fought high-level competition. Kevin Vallejos was able to knock him out in the first round, didn't get a performance of the night bonus. We saw Shadeen Njokuani knock out LSU Zaleski dos Santos in an impressive performance. It didn't get a bonus. Rather than having, a performance of like 3 or 4 performance of the night bonuses, why not just make it 1 for obviously the most impressive performance, and then take the rest, split it into, I don't know, 10 or 20, doesn't really matter, and basically give them to fighters as incentive for finishing the fight. That way we would see more aggression, because now it's guaranteed that if you manage to finish a fight, you get paid extra. And it's not as meaningful for fighters on the main card than it probably is for fighters on the prelims. But I mean, that's basically where everything grows, is from the prelims it grows up. It's like the foundation. So if you have insane prelims and you have fighters on the prelims putting an exclamation mark on a fight, finishing a fight in an impressive fashion, not only does it set somewhat of a tone, but it also attracts more attention to the prelims, and you have the opportunity to be able to grow more stars. So I feel like it would make sense. But those are basically the two biggest problems I see. Now obviously eye pokes, massive problem. This weekend, UFC Fight Night Vettori versus Delite, we saw enough eye pokes for the whole year. And Roman Delite was lucky not to get a point deduction in that fight, because going into the round, I can't remember whether it was second, I think it was the second round, or maybe third, he got warned prior to the round to close his fist. And basically in the first exchange, he accidentally poked Marvin's eye, and Herb Dean didn't deduct a point, which he could have, which he probably should have. So eye pokes obviously a massive problem within the UFC. But let me know, what do you think is the biggest problem in the UFC right now? And it's fine to criticize. It is. You know, criticism is a blessing. It means that you're worth talking about. So don't see this as I'm a hater. It's just basically an analogy, and just, you know, sharing my thoughts. But I'd love to hear yours. What do you think is the biggest problem within the UFC right now? Let me know in the comment section, and have a great day.